welcome to Ithaca Politics. This is our maiden voyage for a series of shows looking at the political life of Ithaca, New York. Our first guests, the candidates for mayor for the Republican Janis Kelly and the Democratic challenger Robert Cantelmo. The mayor's race is a bit puzzling this year. You are both vying for a position that has diminished responsibilities and a 50% pay cut. So really, what is the attraction here?
To address the main point of your question, why run for this office, it's not something I would have done had the city manager referendum not passed last November. I think the new role of the mayor is going to be a really important responsibility of policy leadership. I have likened the new role of the mayor as being sort of a majority leader for council, someone who can work with the different neighborhoods and the different wards across the city, someone who can work with the different communities and the different issues and try to bring council together toward consensus. It's not about directing the operations of the city, right? That is council's responsibility to oversee the city manager. It's more about articulating a clear vision, providing that policy guidance to city staff, and working with the community and with council, as well as our federal and our state and our regional representatives to deliver what's best for the community.
Okay. Janis, is there anything particularly attractive to you about the mayor's position?
I differ a little bit. I share some of Rob's analysis, and I differ on a couple of things. I think that the city government has made a mess of things in the last 10 years. We're not safer. We're less neighborly and united. People are tired of that. And I think where he and I agree is that the mayor's position as it is newly constituted is a good one to try and bring people together. And the way I think of it is turning away from the politics of grievance to the politics of gratitude and compassion and working together as neighbors. And we're going to have to come together to solve the problems because the city's in a mess. You know, we have crime problems, we have money problems, we have flooding problems, we have infrastructure problems, and we have huge staffing problems. And that is not something that somebody's going to parachute in and save us from. We're going to have to do that ourselves. We're going to have to come together as neighbors. And I think the mayor is in the best position to catalyze that bringing back together. And also to really highlight what issues are in the different areas of the city. You know, you have to get down off East Hill or out of your office to do that. And the mayor is the best person for doing that. And, you know, I love Ithaca. I want to see it be peaceful and safe and practical and prosperous again. And so that's why I decided to throw my hat in the ring.
One of the hottest issues now is the renegotiation of the pilot. That is the payment in lieu of taxes for Cornell University. Shouldn't we just perhaps take what they can offer graciously in the interests of town-gown relations?
Well, right now there isn't a contribution because the people who are negotiating, the three anonymous people negotiating on the city's behalf, sort of dropped the ball and turned down $3 million and asked for $5 million, and Cornell walked away from the negotiations. So I don't know where that stands, but once memorandum of understanding, you know, once that one expires, the city has a $1.6 million hole in the budget where the Cornell contribution used to go because they've screwed up the negotiation.
Cornell has to recognize with its $5.5 billion annual operating budget that what the city provides in terms of its geography, its resources, its infrastructure that the students and their families all draw upon, the faculty and staff all draw upon, those things require maintenance. They require attention. They require reinvestment. And I think it was a very smart call by the negotiating team to basically say that this was not an acceptable offer. Yes, there's a hole in the budget. And yes, it's going to be council's prerogative to figure out how to fill that hole. But responsibility there rests with the university system that has decided to say, we are not willing to make this investment. We are not willing to provide roads for our students. We are not willing to
Oh,
provide.
come on, Rob. They do all the roads up there.
Oh, Janice, I'm
You're-
sorry. I thought we had agreed that we weren't going to interrupt
You're right,
each other.
You're right.
But no, that's a great point. You said they do all their own roads. I would say Cornell is more than welcome to not pay for their own roads if they want to instead contribute to the city, and they want to get to the back of the line like everyone else in the community who has to wait for road repair because of our finances being we're insufficiently able to cover the DPW replacement costs. You know, it's you get about 20 years of life in a road. That means you need to be able to replace about 5% of your roads a year. Ithaca's replacement rate now is around 1%. And yes, we have the geographical challenges and the climate challenges that bracket our ability to do that year round. But at the end of the day, if Cornell wants to tout the paving of their own roads, they're welcome to do so. I think the community would respond with, why is it only in your immediate environment that you want to prioritize this maintenance and not the rest of the city?
Did you want to respond to
Yes,
this?
and the answer is that Cornell is a tax-exempt institution, whether we like it or not. I myself think we ought to be lobbying to tax the increase in income from their endowment every year in conjunction with other places. But the fact is, what they're doing right now is perfectly legal. I don't think it's right. I'm an alum, but it is legal. And what the city negotiating team did, whoever they may be, the three people in a room, we were sitting at 1.6 million, and they went in and Cornell offered 3.15 million. And the city geniuses said, no, we're not going to accept less than 5 million. And Cornell said, pound sand. So they basically threw away $3.14 million, and now there's a $1.6 million hole in the budget. And it is not true that the city provides all of those kinds of services to Cornell. They do a lot of their own stuff. And if you go to the Cornell website, you know, they have it all laid out there. And in fact, I think the Ithaca Times does too. They puff it up a little bit. You know, like they also should be kicking in more for the school district. You know, they raised their school district from 500 grand to 600 grand. And the school system is one of the big factors that attracts people here. So I think there's some changes that need to be made. But I think throwing away $3.15 million because it's not 5 million is dumb, especially when you have no legal power over the person you're negotiating with, the institution.
Some people believe one way to keep Ithaca's tax base from eroding further is discontinue the tax abatements to developers for luxury and market rate buildings. So where do you stand on the issue of continuing abatements for developers?
I really think that needs to be completely revisited. The habit of giving tax abatements to residential developers, if they promise to build inexpensive units as part of theirs, and then letting them fork over 5 grand and get out of that is wrong. When you have apartments that are renting market rate for $2,000 a month, $5,000 is nothing, you know? And I really, really object to having that money goes into a community fund. Some of that goes to Ithaca neighborhood housing, which I also have problems with because they do a lot of land trust stuff so that people who get their houses don't actually get to own the land free and clear in a way that you would in a normal situation. But that's tangential. What I really object to is coddling the demands of the developers with these multi-year abatements and letting them buy their way out of providing housing that they have promised to provide.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just respond and say I think where it comes to abatements, you need to have an enforceable mechanism to actually get those units that are affordable for the system to work. But I also want to turn for a second and highlight, we should also be empowering the residents of the community to be mini developers, right? I mean, I've talked a lot about what I refer to as the missing middle on housing. And it's great that we've got a lot of these larger apartment buildings. I mean, that is absolutely filling a need, right? But there also needs to be the ability for someone to build a duplex and live in that and rent out the other side, or to build an accessory unit so that they can either age in place, or that perhaps if they have children who are just finishing school, they have somewhere to live.
And we want them to go to California.
Sure. But I think we need a more diversity of options for the people in this community. You used to be able to start working and purchase a starter home. And the ability to do that, not just in Ithaca, but across the nation, has really diminished. And partly this is because we have really outdated regulation on the book that says, well, you have to be this far from the sidewalk, you have to be this far from your neighbor, you have to have this many people. And it's time to take a comprehensive look at this and say, what can we do to help the community thrive so that housing is available at all levels for all people?
Mm-hmm. That's a point at which Rob and I absolutely agree. Every kind of regulation, development, zoning, design, maintenance, all of those things, the whole, swamp of it needs to be re-examined in Ithaca, because we are part of this nationwide housing crisis, which everybody knows. But we make it worse because we have exactly the kinds of problems that Rob just described. And I have to say, I was delighted that you found some regulations you didn't like, being a Democrat and all. And I was unfortunately saddened that what you want to do is peel away some of those, but then add rent control into the mix on top of it, which has not been a great idea.
Well,
but we clearly need to rethink all of the whole regulatory structure with housing here. And
do you have anything specifically that you would look at?
All of the things Rob just talked about: design, the distance back from the street, parking, facades, how many units you can have in a certain square footage of land, whether you can have accessory units or not. The thicket of impediments to people building things, even on lots they own, is huge. And just about any housing developer you talk to about building in the city of Ithaca will tell you there are too many hurdles, there are too many regulations, it's not worth it. So they go to Lansing.
I just want to respond to that quickly, because the idea of characterizing rent stabilization as rent control, I think, muddles the waters a little bit. I think we know there's a pretty significant difference in stabilizing rates in a way that permits the negotiation between tenant and landlord against what is the sort of outmoded mode of the 1970s and 1980s of stringent rent control. But I want to turn that back for a second. Why do I support, I assume you're referring to good cause eviction or the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. Well, I support those statewide initiatives for a couple of reasons. One, the state of New Jersey has good cause. And no one is saying that the state of New Jersey is an unproductive place for landlords, is a place that's difficult to get housing any more than it is in the environs outside of New York City. I'd also point to Tokyo, the largest metropolis on earth, has good cause eviction. I would posit we don't want to be incentivizing a system that says if you're paying your rent, if you're abiding by the terms of your lease, if you're following the law, that you can't live in your home. It's providing some minimal protections for people to know that they're not going to come home one day and find out that there's a 25% increase on their rent, and that they're displaced. They're either moved out of their neighborhood or they're moved out of the city. And when you're a single parent or a young professional trying to figure out how to navigate a stable stable situation for yourself and in the community where you can put down roots, I think we owe it to the community to say, let's support those initiatives and provide that equity for everyone involved.
But we also owe it to landlords who keep getting saddled with more and more taxes and fees and maintenance things and stuff they have to pass on to their tenants, to consider their side of it too. And what I think we need is, and I think this is something that we could join together on, I think we need like a task force, that includes tenants, homeowners, developers, planners, architects, the city inspectors, to really look at what's gone wrong here. because we are in the middle of a national housing crisis, but we have made it worse by some of the stuff that's been piled on. And I think peeling back some of that stuff could really help. And like you, I really would like to prioritize people being able to buy and own their houses. That's the secret to creating generational wealth that can be passed down. And until we have more housing built, that's not going to happen. So I think we're on the same page about major changes are needed.
Okay. I'd like to talk about the Green New Deal for just a minute. So not that long ago, what I would call as a more or less a heralded climate activist walked out of City Hall as a sustainability director because he felt that City Hall was slow walking important climate initiatives. And I'd like to hear from you both whether you agree in total with the Green New Deal objectives or if you believe some of them should be rolled back. Robert, why don't you start,
Yeah,
please?
thank you. So I think we have to recognize that the only viable option for us to succeed as a nation is to transition towards a green economy. Pretending that climate change isn't real, pretending that we can kick the cans down the road indefinitely is just not a solution. These are the jobs that will bring good opportunity to people in our region. We've seen this with Micron and some of the other tech industry that's coming to upstate New York. These are the workforce development training that is going to reinvigorate a lot of the trades. I mean, this is that's why it's the Green New Deal. It is an economic opportunity for us to invest in. I also think we have to really put this in context with what has happened. Council supported the Green New Deal. And then what happened? We hit a once in 100 years global pandemic that has ground not just the Green New Deal, but all major initiatives in all city governments across the country. Things suffered. We had to furlough staff. We had to pause initiatives. There are advisory bodies that were suspended because they couldn't have volunteers safely meet to discuss the issues that they were tasked with deliberating over. And even despite that, we've made significant progress with the green building codes. We've made significant progress towards exploring community choice aggregation, which will severely improve our ability to deliver energy and utilities to the community. And we've been hard at work trying to secure federal and state funding to deal with the new draft FEMA flood maps and deal with the flood issues and the resilience challenges that are facing much of the flats in our community. So for me, it is an important issue, but it's also a self-evident one. There's no option here. If we don't try to embrace this and try to move forward and say, here are the ways that we can benefit the community, we're doing a disservice in the long run.
Your response, Janis?
I think that it's a currently fashionable set of ideas. And my major complaint about the way the city has dealt with things is that those new policies are going to have the greatest impact on the people least able to afford them in the neighborhoods that are not rich. And very little thought is given to that. I think expecting the feds and the state to bail us out is a joke, especially given what's happening in the economy of the state right now. And I think expecting any of that to have much impact on climate change is unlikely to be fulfilled unless you're going to go to China and India, because they are the ones who are the real contributors, not Ithaca. So I understand that it's something that people feel an almost religious fervor for, and I don't actually think it's going to make much difference. And I particularly want them not to come after my gas stove.
Mm-hmm. So you're a little bit skeptical about local initiatives that are essentially global issues?
No, I'm all for people doing things economically, not wasting stuff, not wasting resources. I think expecting to transition to a primarily electric economy without also building the infrastructure, including nuclear power, is destined to fail. I mean, look at what's happened with electric cars. They're piling up on dealers' lots. People aren't buying them. And Secretary Granholm did her triumphal tour with an EV and a couple of others. She's the energy secretary, and didn't get very far because there weren't enough chargers and they didn't work. So a lot of that sounds pretty, but I don't think it's going to happen.
I just want to get back to your point, Robert. So it sounds like the criticism of City Hall for not moving faster for the Green New Deal was based on just because issues with the pandemic had slowed everything down. Is that your point? And you do feel that the city is moving at a good pace towards fulfilling those goals?
So I think we have to just look at the whole thing in context. Do I think that there have been challenges that have resulted in us moving at a slower pace than desirable? Yes. I'm not here to speak for or against any particular administration policy there. What instead I want to say is let's not diminish the work of the city staff and the community activists and the research and advisory bodies of the city that have put a tremendous amount of effort into making really substantive victories for the city. To just Janis's point about the secretary's visit or attempted visit around the country, if communities aren't building those charging stations, then they won't be there. People need to.
Who's going to pay for them?
But I think there are federal incentives, there are state incentives, there are investments that a community can make in moving us away. There are real costs associated with gas and with oil. Gas stoves, I hear you about your personal preference towards it. I'll also just note, right, there is clear scientific data that shows that if you are a child growing up in a home with a gas stove, you are more likely to have asthma, right? So we could talk about costs, but these costs are inbuilt into our system. And like any major technological revolution, there is always going to be some discomfort as a new equilibrium is arrived at. We have to do it in a way that makes sense. I think one of the top priorities needs to be the flood mitigation, because that's going to impact people's lives far sooner than some of these other challenges. But at the same time, you don't want to be the last community making these changes when a gas provider is charging you through the nose because so many other communities have switched over to electric power.
Okay.
I'd just like to refute one thing you said, that the claim that growing up with gas stoves predisposes kids to asthma is nonsense. I read that research. They did not control for socioeconomic class in that. And that is a very strong correlation with childhood asthma for a lot of different reasons having to do with housing. So that's being used as the argument, but the science is just not there. I mean, a lot of the push really does, to me, sound like what a former Cornell professor called the vision of the anointed. Self-congratulation as a basis for social policy.
Ithaca Politics has gone out into the community and taken questions and concerns about Ithaca. We've talked to some people on the Ithaca Commons.
I suppose one of my questions would simply be, what are they doing or what will they do to create a safer and more hospitable environment in most Ithaca locations that are filled with people either doing drugs or doing other things that essentially can make it feel more hostile for anyone else who is in the area. So my only question would be, how would they be able to create more spaces where people feel more comfortable in their environment? Yeah.
We need more officers, We need more officers out here, So I'm hoping that these guys, these people, they gotta have a plan, because it doesn't seem to me like they have a plan,
Yeah, my question would be, what are the opinions for all of the candidates in terms of pushing for more complete streets and zoning initiatives that can do more for like mixed-use housing and allow for more bike lanes to be built and other things that improve the accessibility for people getting around Ithaca.
All right, so I guess my concern for anybody running for city council and stuff is what's going to happen with IPD, and why is IPD out here not protecting and serving and bullying and harassing their citizens? Something needs to be done. If the community is the reason to blame for why IPD can't do their job, then obviously the community needs to reform IPD. Because after what I saw last night of 6 cops trying to take down one person as 30 people are upset about it, I don't think they're out here trying to help anybody. I think they're out here just trying to harm the citizens that literally pay their bills. Thank you.
Yes, have you been down to the Commons recently? And if so, do you have any comments on some of the overt crime that's been taking place down here, along with the pollution and exposed drug use and lots of things that are worrisome to the average citizen? I don't have kids myself per se, but I do have concerns, and hopefully somebody up here can address these items.
As a manager of a business, been here for 11 years, and also being colleagues with other business owners and people that run businesses, I want somebody to tell me why there isn't a police officer down here, and I don't want to hear about funding. So far, I know for a fact that Ithaca can afford 3 police officers on duty for each shift, and that one of those officers should be downtown. We have mentally ill people, we have criminals, there's been stabbings, there's been shootings, there are people that try to follow me into my own store. I've seen assaults take place outside. Patroon has had to lock their door because someone's smoking crack outside, and I've called 911 twice. It's a 45-minute response time. If you're a Democrat or Republican, and I don't care how you feel about the police, but they're needed, and they're needed downtown at least between 11 p.m. and 7 p.m. every day, because we are building infrastructures, high-end hotels, high-end apartments, and people can't even be safe downtown. So why are they going to come here and spend $5,000 to live in an apartment where there are people literally defecating in front of my store? So I want to know where the cops are, what their plans are in getting them down here. And if you're building all this stuff to attract rich people, what wealthy people are going to want to be here when there's people smoking crack on the benches?
Do you think the Commons can ever be returned to a community free from this, I call it despair, that has settled in? And really, what does it speak to the future of our public spaces? Okay. Janis, would you like to go ahead?
Well, I'll tell you, the Commons is cheerful compared to the West End, where I live. And that reflects the fact that the current city government has failed in one of the major jobs of a government, which is to protect its citizens. Governments are allowed a monopoly on the use of force, and the deal is they keep us safe, and that is not happening. When we have a murder in the jungle of a guy who was snatched out of the jungle, and it's so bloody and brutal and involves so many people that it makes the national news, we have a problem. We need a complete change in how things are being managed. We need a police force that's well-resourced, well-trained, and respected and well-monitored, and not demonized. And that's where we're not there yet.
Okay.
Well, first, I just want to acknowledge the tragedy that happened in the Southwest that my colleague here has just made reference to. And I also want to congratulate the officers at IPD and the Sheriff's Department and the other affiliated agencies that helped make several arrests related to that.
11 arrests.
Yes, I think, and more to come is what I've heard.
Including of a guy who testified
Okay,
before
but
Common Council. I'm
I'd
sorry.
like to hear from Robert,
I'm
please.
sorry,
Your
Robert.
reaction to the comments that were made on the Commons.
I would say on the Commons itself, if anyone wants to come down on a Saturday or Sunday, I'm usually there at the little playground with my kids having a cup of coffee. I do think there's an opportunity to restore some of the vibrance to the Commons and other elements of the community that have suffered as a direct consequence of the economic despair that has been brought on by the pandemic. I think one of the things that we've seen is there absolutely is a need to have a fully staffed department so that we can have that community policing. We can have those beat officers on the Commons rather than just a handful of folks driving around the city. I'm very heartened to see that we have over 140 signups on the civil service exam right now. I'm really optimistic. Myself and several of my colleagues on council voted to ensure that we kept all of the roster positions for the department in the budget last year. And I am also very supportive, as my colleague Tiffany Kumar has said, about our prospects for having a permanent police chief, because none of the hard work that we've done around reform and identifying alternative response methods and coming up with new and better training for our officers, none of that can be done without permanent leadership in the department. And that's another area where I think the city's making good progress, and I'm optimistic that we will have that leadership in place.
For the city to become vibrant again, people have to feel safe, and public spaces have to be safe, and you have to not be forever hassled by somebody who's off their head on drugs. And you have to not have people, sleeping in their own mess on the side of the commons that you see the first thing Saturday morning. All of that stuff, that has to change. Some of that is the result of unfortunate policies, and some of it is the result of lack of staffing, as Rob pointed out.
Just to add to that, I would say, one of these challenges, I think the major thing that drives a lot of this is the economic insecurity. We've already talked about housing, but when there's a lack of housing, especially in supportive service for folks who are transitioning out of being unhoused or people who are at risk for becoming unhoused, when that infrastructure isn't there, people are falling through the gaps. And that's not a recipe for a vibrant community. In order to help us recover to our pre-pandemic levels, we need to recognize that there's a quality of life issue, again, in Ithaca, but nationwide. Inflation's out of control. People have been struggling to pay basic bills. Childcare in this community is rampantly expensive. And all of those factors contribute to an overall insecurity that people feel. And yes, sometimes that manifests itself as a public safety issue, but it also is broader than that. And we need to revisit and reinvest infrastructure, and shoring up city services, core city services, should be at the heart of what anyone in this role is focused on.
And I'd like to add one thing, which is that
Quickly.
we need to prioritize the rights of the law-abiding, hardworking citizen over the rights of the predatory and the criminal.